Hi, speaker number 6. I'm sorry about that. Uh, I'm a psychiatrist by background. I have been one for over 20 years. I'm going to, the team prepared a lovely deck and I'm going to take you through it. But then I looked at it this morning and thought I'm going to talk about resilience and vulnerability. And if I don't display some of that myself, it won't be an authentic conversation. So I'm going to just go talk about a bit of my life journey and see how I can thread in the conversation about some of the facts around resilience into that. So, as I said, I'm a psychiatrist. I've been through a journey of going to medical school not far from Bangalore, then going off to the UK, training in psychiatry, practicing as a psychiatrist, running large teams. My largest team I ran was about 900 people, clinical professionals. Went to business school sometime in the middle of it, and then moved back to India to build a mental health ecosystem here about 8 years ago, right? And that journey has required a lot of different experiences to be pulled together as a psychiatrist, as a business leader, as a healthcare entrepreneur. And now I'm running a company that is about small compared to Flipkart or Tata. And there were 200 people team that we sort of work with day to day, right? So we're going to try and build this together and see what is the value of resilience. How do we build it? Can we build it? And then what do we need to do for ourselves as leaders in the organization as we think these things. So first of all, I'm just going to do a show of hands. How many people in the room know somebody who's experienced a mental health difficulty in the last year? That's like 90% of the room. If I go back 5 years and say, 5 years ago, how many of you knew somebody who had a mental health difficulty around you? That's about half of the number that would raise their hand. How many of you know somebody who at the workplace, in your workplace, has experienced a mental health difficulty and you know about it? Now, I'm not going to ask you many more questions, but if I go back to 5 years, we've been working with organizations, we work with 100 plus organizations, and we've been doing that for about 6-7 years now. And if I go back to 6 years ago, probably about 2 or 3 people will raise their hand. And so that's how the conversation shifted in the last, especially 3 years. Essentially. So it's no longer an afterthought. And one of the things that comes across very clearly is the traits that lead to higher risk of mental health difficulties. And resilience and not having resilience contributes to a higher risk of being depressed, of feeling anxious as an individual. And collectively, those individuals that form their organization then lead to organizations with lower resilience. So it's really, really important to connect those two dots and say, how do I think about my own resilience as a leader, as a team, as an organization, and how is that going to feed into the resilience of the overall organization itself? Now, what does it mean, right? In very, very basic terms, it's the ability to bounce back. There's a crazy English word called bounce back ability. And that's what resilience really means, essentially, right? So it's the ability to bounce back from adversity, from a setback, and how quickly, how effectively, how easily you bounce back defines how resilient you are as a person or an organization. And why is it important? There are 2-3 things, right? As an organization, why is resilience important, right? Because 2 things. One, it's clearly been shown now that resilience and organizational survivability are linked to each other. McKinsey had this data out last year. They talked about how if you are not a resilient organization or on resilient markers you score poorly, the chances of going bankrupt in the next 2 years go up significantly higher. Now that's an extreme data set, but that's the data they put out about a year ago. I think they put out the data set. Right? So as an organization, your survival depends on how resilient you are as an organization and as individuals, right? But also as individuals, we've heard the numbers today, right? I was part of the Deloitte data we talked about this morning, and this is an old data set. That number is a lot higher now. That's a ASSOCHAM FICCI data set from about 7-8 years ago. That number is a lot higher now. We don't have the new data set. That's it. There's a whole conversation which is quite demeaning in some ways around ROI of mental health investment, right? It was the cool conversation about 10 years ago. Now it feels morally wrong to even have that conversation about ROI because of where we are today in our journeys of mental health, right? But that data is there, right? And about again an economic loss data around the value of mental health in systems. But if you just strip off all that noise and say, it's so hard to build organizations, it's so hard to build teams, and you experience loss of significant team members the moment you start losing resilience in team members. As soon as you start losing resilience, you start losing people, right? Because the first thing that goes is your best people when you start losing resilience in an organization. So for any no other reason is building resilience is the safety mechanism through crisis when you work through stuff, right? Now the big debate is it inherent? Are some people, some teams, some organizations just more resilient, or can we actually build it? Right now, all the data suggests that it's a muscle that can be built, right? And you build it through a lot of basic stuff that you have to do with organizations, right? But let me just start weaving some of my stories through this conversation. I moved back to India about 8 years ago. I was at the peak of my career, at the peak of my resilience, and I came here to a very, very different environment to what I'd been experiencing for 15 years before that. And one setback after the other completely wore me down over a period of 6 to 8 months, to the extent that I was not sure whether I even wanted to start up what I wanted to start up anymore. Right? I hadn't even started yet, and I wasn't even sure I wanted to start up anymore. And bit by bit, by working on myself over the next 6 to 8 months, I got to a point of saying, okay, now we can do this. Right? But actually, the personal impact of that loss of resilience became so obvious to me for the first time. Because you know what happens? People who are in careers like mine, they're so used to success, right? Because you do well at school, then you do well at college, you get to medical school, you then get a job, then the job keeps going well, and so actually you never get the opportunity to build that muscle because everything seems to be going in a flow one after, and that's going to be the reality of most of the people in your organizations. Most of the successful people in your organization would have had that journey of doing well at college and then going to a business school and then getting good jobs and then in next promotion and the next career change, and so they would have never experienced the opportunity till the first time something goes wrong. So the opportunity to build that muscle never really exists. So how do you actually create opportunities without taking that risk is what becomes about resilience. How do you make resilience happen, right? Now, there are three factors that we can think about as leaders. The first one's been talked about a lot today, and that's been about flexibility. I was saying, how do you create autonomy and flexibility? Most people feel less resilient when they don't have autonomy, when they feel like they're going to be checked upon at every step, when every step going to be second guessed. So how do you build structures that create autonomy? I'll give you an example. I took my first senior role as a psychiatrist back in 2006-7, and I went to a team that had had no leadership for the last 10 years. And literally, people came, went, and everybody who came then was so scared of what might go wrong in that team that they micromanaged the team at every step. And so what you had was very poor outcomes. This was a clinical service, really poor outcomes, high rates of sort of suicides and deaths, long wait times, and what needed to happen was these amazing clinicians was just to empower them. And so actually over a period of 6 to 9 months, doing a lot of training, doing a lot of process development, that then allowed them the autonomy to work independently in a more supported manner. They led to a service which when I first entered had wait times of 9 months. By the time I left it, you could be referred today and seen tomorrow. Right? But all that was done by the people in that team. The same team, we didn't change any personnel, the same team, and all we did was help them understand their roles and empower them to deliver their roles. So how do we create that in our current business environment? How do we actually say, this is who we are, this is what our boundaries of our values are, and how are you going to deliver within that is really up to you. And that empowerment over a period of time builds resilience, because then people feel that even if it's a setback, if it's a loss, then come back from it and really work through it with their own steam essentially. So that becomes very important. And the second fundamental point is really around building a learning culture. Now, as a doctor, I'm often fascinated, was at least before I started my own business, around what people described as stressful. Right? I used to spend all nights in one of the busiest ERs in Europe, used to see about 7 to 8 suicidal patients in a night, then go home, sleep comfortably, and not feel stressed. And I took on management roles when I post my MBA, and everybody seemed very stressed with seemingly very unreal risks. And realized that there's actually very little reflection happening. There's very little reflection and space for learning that happens in those sets, right? So, and I mean, the service I eventually ran used to see about 40,000 patients in a month, and so you got to a point that in any given week, something would have gone wrong, right? Something would have gone wrong around somebody might have died on a ward, or somebody might have died by suicide, and that was just an unfortunate side effect of the area we were working in, and that's. But what we did very well as an organization was it debriefed heavily, right? We debriefed individually, we debriefed as a team, we debriefed as a system, and we took reflections from it in very real time, and then fed them back to the teams in a no blame way. So that heavy amount of investment in learning allowed people to feel more confident, allowed people to have that ability to then apply those learnings the next time they face a similar situation. And we've applied the learning now to what we do with the organization, right? We work with a large multinational pharmaceutical organization, and they've had a critical incident within one of their teams a month and a half, 2 months ago. And we've gone in and done the same thing with them. Our professionals have gone in, helped them do the debriefs, helped them do the learning, do the reflection, and we think that's going to help them really well as they move forward. Not in just that type of incident, but any other types of incident, because what they've now been left with is a lot more innate strength to deal with what's really happened.